Growing up, I didn't know why at first, but I could tell I saw the world differently than most people. I don't just see the world the way most people see it. I see beauty in odd places and find joy out of the most random things. I see a world that I thought needed to be changed as soon as possible. After my parents adopted me when I was 2, they noticed that I was developing really slow and they basically thought, something's not right here. So they took me to the doctor and they said, he can't be diagnosed with anything till he is of the age of 4 years old. So after 2 years, they took me to the doctor and then I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome or autism. I didn't really start noticing that I was different from other people till I reached 7th grade. And then a few years after that, I started to feel isolated from other people. I honestly felt like there was an unbreakable prison inside my mind and I just didn't want my disability anymore. I looked upon the disability itself as a curse. So I started using my disability as an excuse for everything.
You know what? This is boring. Hey, David. You know what we should do?
Yeah.
We should start dancing like monkeys and not do our work at all.
I don't think that's a good idea, Scott.
Who cares?
I care.
You know what? Let's just make as much excuses as we can and just act like goofballs.
I don't know, Scott, man. I gotta get this done, you know?
You already got 101. You can afford to take a break. You're like one of the top students, okay?
Oh, Scott, you don't understand, man. I got so much pressure on me. I really have to do this work.
Scott, can you calm down just a little bit? Quit being so goofy.
I'm sorry, Miss Spoon. I can't. My name is Scott Combs, and I have a disability. That is why.
And I told myself, it's my right to do that. But then I posted a 10-slide story to my Instagram about how much I hated my disability and how much I didn't want it anymore. And long story short, my friends gave me advice and they cheered me up and gave me a more positive outlook on life.
But I'm not here to just give you my disability story. Me and my best friend Sydney are here to try and find the answer to the big universal question, what makes autism special?
So in order to find the answer to this question, we'll be interviewing 5 people,
Including you.
based on educational background in order to gather multiple points of view, in order to answer the question, what makes autism special?
Our first person is Miss Polly.
Do you know the 3 types of autism and how are they different?
You have general autism, you have Asperger's, and then you also have pervasive developmental disorder. They're different in that autism is usually considered a little bit more severe and more focused on communication delays and certain developmental delays, while Asperger's is typically more the ability to process and register social cues, and then PDD is usually a combination of the two, and also much more mild. So it's where people lack enough of the symptoms to really count as either autism or Asperger's.
So like atypical?
Yeah.
Okay. What are the usual signs of autism?
There's usually some communication delays, specifically related to speech, usually at a younger age, the ability to speak at the expected time. There's usually a lot of physical delays in development, and then sometimes as they age, it's more based on things like repetitive behaviors. Usually when there's not a set routine or their schedule is chaotic, it can usually result in repetitive behaviors as kind of a coping skill. So to use you as an example, if I were to have a class and not organize it or structure it, there's no agenda, you might feel a little bit more anxious or uncomfortable, and one of the things that you do in that situation would be that you pace the room, just in more of a repetitive behavior, not an outburst, not aggressive, not violent, just a repetitive behavior.
So from your viewpoint, or from psychological viewpoint, how is it a disability exactly?
It's a really good question. So normally how we define a disability is when something impairs their ability in some way, whether this is relationally or whether it's just your functioning in any setting whatsoever. Typically with autism or Asperger's, it's going to play out more so in relationships. That difficulty in understanding what other people are trying to communicate and then being able to effectively communicate in response. And sometimes there's some miscommunication issues. And when a psychologist would intervene or get involved in that situation, that's typically what we're helping with, is more in their ability to be successful in their relationships.
Okay. From a psychological standpoint, what makes autism special?
I've noticed that the people that I've interacted with autism or Asperger's, they're usually very creative in that they think outside of the box. There's kind of a set way that most people think, but people with autism think in a completely deviant behavior, so a completely different way. So it's usually just very creative. They're excellent people to have on a brainstorming session because everyone else is going to be thinking of the problem and solution in a very set manner, and they're the ones offering something that nobody had even thought of or considered. So it's very special and very unique in that they have a very special and unique way of thinking, very creative in their thought life.
Thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
That was some good information, but I still don't think we found the answer yet.
On the search for the answer to our question, we decided to look for answers from another perspective. The next person is Dr. Sherwood.
Can you give us a brief history of autism?
A brief history. Well, autism's been around for a long, long time, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
But the psychological community, especially the psychiatric community, which are medical doctors that have studied psychology, have since 1947 created what they call a spectrum.
Okay.
What they recognized is that there are behaviors associated with autism that become increasingly identifiable and debilitating.
Okay.
That is to say, there are people who have autistic tendencies, like people with Asperger's, who are functioning in the world. And then as we move up the spectrum, we get to the very end where there are people that are totally unable to relate to anybody. Except and unless they feel like they're controlling their environment. So from 1947 on, we've had this notion of the spectrum, and the definition of the spectrum and the points along it have changed since then. Now here in 2019 we have what's called a DSM-5, which is basically a desk manual for psychiatrists that explains that there are 3 basic levels of autism.
Yep.
Okay.
Were there any important people in history who had autism or were thought to have autism?
There are many. Most notably, men like Isaac Newton.
Okay.
You remember him?
The guy where the apple fell on his head and boom, he knows gravity.
Mr. Gravity guy, yeah. And it's three principal laws of
Gravity.
an object in motion remains in motion, an object at rest remains at rest.
Yes.
The whole idea of entropy, those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So it appears that Mr. Newton, who was almost totally asocial, was almost incapable of having interaction with other human beings, was also one of the most brilliant men in history. There's another brilliant man in history on the other side of that is Michelangelo, the painter and sculptor of the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance. He exhibited these characteristics.
Through his art or just through how he talks?
Well, how he managed his relationships with others, mostly.
Okay.
Dr. Tesla of electrical engineering fame is reputed to have been autistic. President Thomas Jefferson is reputed to have been autistic. So there have been many, many people in history that have made a huge difference to all of us who have apparently been afflicted with this problem.
Okay, my last question for you is, How is autism significant to the world's history?
There seems to be a correlation between autism and genius.
Okay.
In fact, it's pretty direct. So you could easily make a case for, like Tesla, for instance, inventions and copyright, not copyright, sorry, I meant trademarks, and patents
Okay.
from his work that are benefiting us today. There are many people who have some part of autism. They're on the very low end of the spectrum. And those are the people that usually are having a difficult time contending with the gift of their intelligence as it relates to other people. Sort of a conceited way of saying it, I guess, would be if you walked into a room with 100 people in it, you'd find a hard time finding one person to talk to. That would be like on the lower edge of autism. And yet, these are the very people who have made all the difference in various aspects of the development of Western history.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Scott, thank you for the interview. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yep. Thank you.
More good info, but I'm still not satisfied. I still don't think I found the answer.
In order to truly find the answer to the question, we decided to get a scientific viewpoint. Next person we interview is Mr. Moore.
What may or may not cause autism?
So autism is basically a disorder with processing information, the way that you react to things. So the way that we consider to be the normal reaction, there's kind of like an ordered flow to information when you see it through the brain. But with someone who has autism or is on the autism spectrum, they don't process it the same way. So you see it going in all sorts of different directions in the brain, but it's not necessarily like an ordered flow. They don't process the information in the same way. So learning tasks that for other people might be easier, if you're on the autism spectrum, it's a lot more difficult. Interacting with people and responding to social cues is a lot more difficult for someone who's on the autism spectrum.
Is there a cure for autism?
There's not a cure for it because it's typically thought of as being genetic. There's still some concerns with environmental stimuli. A lot of times it can be congenital, which basically means that it might as well have been genetic, because if the baby was exposed to something in the womb and it affected their brain development, it's essentially the same as genetic. And with a lot of genetic diseases, there's not necessarily a cure because that is the way the person's mind is. They've tried to look at medication to try to help the person learn better, especially those who are on the extreme end of the autism spectrum. But unless we can figure out a way to completely rewrite the brain, which is still the organ that we know the least about, it's really difficult to find a cure for it. So what you really have to look at is, how do you learn? Is there a way that you can learn differently? Is there a way that you can react to things differently? And a lot of it's more brain training than there really is a cure for it.
How is autism relevant to modern science?
Since there is a lot more that we need to learn about the brain, you look at issues like autism, depression, every time we learn something more about the brain, then we know more about those issues. So when we look at an autistic brain, if we can learn how to get over those hurdles of learning and processing and responding to things, then we can learn those same things about depression and Alzheimer's and other mental issues and other brain pattern issues, and we can step forward in those areas as well.
All right, thank you for your time.
So far, I believe we found 60% of the complete answer, but I'm still not satisfied. I need a 100% straight answer. So, in order to do that, I took a time of deep personal reflection. Let me tell you guys a story. But before I tell you guys the story, just know I'm a Christian, a believer in Christ. On to the story. Before my dad adopted me, right to when he first saw me, he knew in his heart, then and there, that God confirmed to him this, that he was going to use me in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. Well, let's fast forward to just a few months earlier. At that time, I was so upset about my disability and my autism, I ended up thinking for a short time, how could God possibly use me, given the fact that I have this curse and the state that I'm in? And I kid you not, as I thought that, I instantly remembered these Bible verses. Exodus 4:10 through 12. And thinking about that story and my time of reflection, I was encouraged to keep on trying to find the answer.
For us to find a straight answer, we decided to go to someone with actual experience in the realm. We decided to call up Scott's dad.
When Scott was diagnosed with autism, how did it make you feel?
Well, at first we were kind of in shock because we didn't understand autism at all. So when we learned about it and realized there were several spectrums of autism, we felt better to at least know, what was going on.
What were the hardest challenges with raising Scott knowing that he had autism?
Greatest challenges would have been understanding what was actually autism and what was actually Scott. So, but we learned a great deal over the years. There's just a ton of resources available to us. So that made it a lot easier for us. But we learned and we adapted, and it's been a blessing. So.
Would you have it any other way in terms of his autism?
Absolutely not. Scott is Scott, and as far as we're concerned, there is no mistakes. There's nothing missing or anything wrong. So he's the complete package. We'll take him the way he is.
I'm so thankful knowing that I have two loving parents who care about me regardless of my flaws, who give me unconditional love. But the answer to my question is only 80% complete. The last person we will be interviewing is my partner and best friend, Cindy Vanellis. When you first met me, what was your first impression?
My first impression of Scott, of you, was your lightheartedness and the fact that you could just kind of find joy in the little things, and you seem to have no care in the world, and you're friends with everybody and making everybody laugh, and you're always trying your best to help other people feel better. So that's probably the first thing that I realized about you.
Second question. What's your answer? What do you think makes autism special?
I think what makes autism special is the fact that it gives the people who have it a different perspective on life and of the world that no one else can have. And that really brings out like the uniqueness in those people, and even though they may see it as like a struggle or a challenge they need to overcome, it's something really that's beautiful and as a gift. So.
All right, thank you for your time.
So after all that I found, I believe I found the answer to the big universal question, what makes autism special? You guys ready for the answer? Well, the answer is, it's not a curse, it's not a gift. It's what you make of it. And ultimately, I truly believe we're asking the wrong question. What we should have been asking is, what makes autism special to you? Let me tell you guys this. I just found the answer to a question I've been asking for 7 years of my life. What makes autism special? Well, wrong question. Here's a better question. What makes it special to you? I got my answer. What's yours?